guys, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be another writing advice video. I had asked you guys on Twitter what other writing advice videos you wanted to see. You guys had answered a poll that was how to start draft 1. So I thought I'd go ahead and make it. Now, disclaimer, I am not a published author, so take my words with a grain of salt. I'm assuming that even authors would say to take their advice with a grain of salt, but even more so me, because I am not that, I don't say I'm not that credible, but I'm not that credible just quite yet. And also this is my own personal advice from my own experience and kind of messing around and trying out other people's version of how they start drafts and how they do things, and this is what I have found that works. With that being said, let's just kind of get into it. And then also, if you guys want more writing advice videos, leave those down below, and maybe if you follow me on Twitter, keep an eye out, because I do make the occasional poll where I ask what kind of videos you want from me, particularly in terms of the writing stuff, because booktube stuff is fairly easy for me to get through. It's just the writing bits. So yeah. According to my handy dandy bullet journal, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little tips. We'll start with the first tip that I have, and that is literally the easiest tip that I have ever had. Honestly, this is what I do for any piece of writing, whether it's short story, a draft I have to do for work, or a draft that I actually want to write out. I have to craft out maybe the first couple of chapters and literally just write it and not worry too much about it. And then I go back in and I start planning from there. I'm this odd mix of a pantser and a plotter. So I start off my stuff, my drafts, just writing what first comes to mind. Whether it's the scene that I was thinking of or this general idea that I was going off of, I have to write those down. And then I maybe go further and write 1 or 2 chapters, maybe 5 or 10 chapters, max 10. I think the least I've written is 5, and the most I've written is I've maxed out at 10. And then I go back and plot it out from there. I make an outline. I have, before when I was drafting my first draft for this novel, the mirror that you see next to me, I had 3 of them. They're sliding glass mirrors. I had a mirror and a half filled with index cards that I had taped on there just so I know what was going on, and every time I would finish writing a scene, I would take the little thing off. And that's how I did it. I outlined that way. I broke my scenes down, and I found that helps me a lot more, because by the time I'm getting through, say, the first 5 chapters or so, I have kind of gotten a feel for what the book wants to do and the trajectory of where it's going up in terms of leading up to the climax. So I can easily go back and plan out the scenes and plan out how that's going to work for me, and I have found that has magically worked. I need water. 1 second. I didn't even bring my water. I am an unprepared fool. Tip number 2 is that for any kind of writing, especially creative ones, know where it's going to end, or at least the climax. I have written a lot of short stories for my classes, and I have written my fair share of fan fiction and my fair share of original works that never really made it to where I wanted to go. But in terms of writing that and finishing those, I always knew where it was going to end, which is why sometimes writing fan fiction is really nice, because you literally know where you want your book to end, whether it's the season finale, where the movie ends, where the book ends, or whatever. You have that arc already, so you know how to figure out and build up the tension from bottom to the end, because you know that's structure. I think that knowing where your ending is, or your climax, helps you build your story around your ending rather than building your story around the beginning. Because with the ending, you can figure out oh, what happened in this book to get me to point Z, or what happened, I don't know what the halfway alphabet is, we'll say M, because that's my first name. But if you have your climax, you can also do the opposite way too, and say what happened from the beginning that gets me to my climax, and then how can I get my climax down to the end. Either way, I always say that I have to have the ending and the climax. For the most part, I typically end up with both. Sometimes I only really have a climax, and then I somehow, as I'm writing from the beginning to the climax, I figure out the end, and then I can fan it out that way. Although I write chronologically, if that makes sense. I don't plan chronologically all the time, but I write chronologically. Like I said, I think that knowing where the climax or the ending is kind of what makes that whole drafting process easier, because you can kind of fill in the blanks from there, and you know, like literally the highest point of your book and like the lowest point, so to speak. Tip number 3 is that literally don't worry too much about it. Don't research a ton about world building, don't research a ton about like how people fight or like the proper kind of dresses they would have in this particular time frame or anything, or like how your characters are going to act. Literally don't worry, because this is your first draft. You are going to make changes along the way, and I think that if you spend a lot of your time focusing on the little nuances of everything, you're never going to write. Like, let's be clear here. You're gonna sit here and go, oh yeah, I can't write until I get this world finished. So you like research like how the water system works, and then next thing you know exactly like the kind of fresh water, how the water tastes, whether or not you need to filter out the water, can drink it straight from tap, or if there's a water problem in your freaking thing, and then you have figured out their entire water section, but not anything else about the book. So I just say to write and just like word vomit everything. Legit, I am on draft 3, and this is where like literally the world building and the characters are finally starting to come together. So like I said, don't be afraid of just like writing, because you have the opportunity to go back and fix it. So just write what comes to mind, and like as long as you know like your plot and like I said your ending or your climax, it'll be easy to fix from there, because then you can go back and say, I have the major points, and then all I have to do is fix the nuances, which is a lot easier when you have a base to go off of, you know? If you're an artist, you make a sketch first before you line it in. Your line art is literally your draft 2. Your crappy little sketch where you have like destroyed the paper, your erasers smudged everything, there's like it looks so hairy because you're just like sketching everything, that is draft 1. So don't be afraid to make lots of little hairy mistakes with your paper and just sketch random things that come to mind, because it'll literally work out in the end. Tip number 4 that I have for you is read a lot. I am a big firm believer in saying that you cannot be a good writer if you are not an even better reader. During the times where I wasn't reading a ton, my writing took a serious dip, and so did kind of my confidence with it. I have to say that the best times that I was ever a writer during my creative writing workshop classes was in Ireland, and then my first semester in writing classes. And that was because in Ireland I had been reading a ton of books. I took out a bunch of books. Like I literally came home with more books than I left with in Ireland. I read a bunch there. I was in a place where I could read random tidbits, like I was reading Irish mythology as well. So like I said, it just helped a lot. And then that semester where I took my first creative writing class in the States, I was also reading a bunch, and I had a lot of inspiration from other little bits and pieces. The less I read in terms of like the books that I love to read, the less I felt for my writing. And it was really hard to write fantasy when you're reading nothing but classics and like Irish literature. Not the best, like sometimes Irish literature kind of borders on like fabulism, but still not the best kind of base for me to write high fantasy with, you know? Like I said, read a lot, and particularly read in your genre. I'm not saying you can't go out of it and read like contemporary every now and again or sci-fi, but like if you want to write fantasy, you're not going to know how fantasy works if you're reading books like To All the Boys I Loved Before or like John Green books, you know? It's not going to translate well, because that means you understand like the nuances of a good romance book and a good book about tragedy, but you don't know what it takes to make a fantasy world or a sci-fi world or a post-apocalyptic world or whatever kind of world you have. So I just say read a lot of the books that you want, but also read in the genre that you want. Right now, I'm struggling because I have been reading mainly like young adult, but I want to start writing more adult. So it's not translating well for me because I'm so used to how young adult works that when I am trying to write in a more adult prose, it's not working for my brain because it's not what my brain is used to reading, so I can't regurgitate that kind of information. Tip number 5 is learn to take inspiration from literally everything. My creative writing professor told me this when I was still in Ireland, that the best way to be a writer is to be as morally amoral as possible. I forgot who said that. I think she said it was Hemingway. I could be really wrong, so I'll try to throw up the ugly mug here as to who it is. What that means is basically take inspiration from everything. Say you like how this one author did something in The Wicked King. You like how Holly Black did that. Take that and then twist it to be your own. Don't plagiarize, clearly, but like take concepts from books that you love or TV shows that you love and then twist it. see how you can make it work for your own writing style, for your own story, see if it fits, and then just twist it. You're not copying because, like, sub-tip number 2 for this one is that the world's been around for like a bajillion years. People have had brains for some odd years. I don't know if they have brains now, but they have had them. And there are ideas upon ideas that have been shared and published and just made into existence that literally the concept of originality is dead. It's just gone. Like, people complain about this all the time, how like several books are like written like so similarly, and that is because they are. There is no concept of originality anymore, and that's okay, because what makes things original is how we write them. So if I were to throw my luck into another witchy book, there are thousands of witchy books out there, lots of books about witches, but why would my book end up getting published, or why would someone pick up my book? It's because I had twisted the witches in a way that was intriguing to everyone and that everyone wanted to read. So then people who want more witchy books or want to like hop on that witchy book success would take that same concept of witches and then twist them to fit however. That's why we have a lot of fae books right now with Holly Black, with Sarah J. Maas. That's why we had a lot of vampire books. That's why we had a lot of retellings. People just kind of take these things and remake them. The sooner you understand that the concept of originality is dead, the easier it is for you to just write. Because I struggled with that a lot. And then I finally sat down and was like, you know what? There's been a lot of people on this world that have had these same ideas, and they got published. And you want to know why? It's because they wrote things differently. If that's just one way to think about it, if you want to pep yourself up, that's how I pep myself up when I'm like laying on the floor eating Oreos, wondering about like why my writing sucks. It's because I just think it's not original, but it probably is. Just kidding. That original point that I had, that was point number 6. Point number 7, and the last point that I have for this video as to how to start draft 1, is literally experiment. This is like your first draft. First drafts mean absolutely nothing in terms of like the grander scheme of things. You can experiment however you want. Because like characters, once they get a mind of their own, they're basically petulant children that'll throw fits, that will change things, and like they'll threaten separation even though you worked really hard to make sure that they didn't end up that way. So like literally experiment with draft 1. If you don't like an idea that happened in draft 1 or like the beginning of draft 1, don't go back and edit it, but insert the new idea continuing on. So that we can go back and say, oh yeah, I like this idea. Or maybe you can go back and say, I like the idea from the beginning, but I want to see how I can twist it so it fits the overall feeling that it was going with the idea from the second half. Does that make sense? And like, don't worry too much about it. I have heard people say that draft 1 is the foundation, like if you're thinking of like building a home. However, I say that's bullshit. I was going so well with not cussing in this video. But I say it's BS. For that reason is because then that means your foundation's scared. That's like very shaky and very weak. Draft 1 is supposed to be really weak. The point of draft 1 is to just exist. Like if you go creating a house, your outline would be your brainstorm. That is what it is. It's you figuring out like, well, how big you want your kitchen to be, whether or not you want big French doors or like just a little balcony entrance, that kind of stuff. That is your outline. Your draft 1 is the sketching. It's the architect stuff. It's you figuring out how this house is going to look at the end of it and how you want it to look. And that is where you can play around. You can figure out if like, hey, we had this idea in brainstorming outline situation, doesn't work for this, so we can take it out and fix it and make it better. This character that I thought was going to be a good part, this little column here, doesn't really work. We can take it out and fix it. I think your actual foundation for your novel is draft 2. Because by draft 2, you know what your house is supposed to look like. You know what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to look a certain way. And then you can start building your idea of what the house is supposed to look like off of draft 1. And that is your foundation. That is your base. And then by draft 3, 4, and 5, you're refining things and like adding like insulation and like all those little things that no one really thinks about when they're walking through a house. Like, you know, you assume that your house should have heating, but who thought of that? That was you figuring out the basis of things. You should assume that your house has a structure that can hold you up. You assume all these things about the house, but really that came from like draft 2 and draft 1. So really don't be afraid to experiment and like take things out and fix things from draft 1. And not every thought that you had for your dream house is going to end up in your actual house, and that's okay. So it should be okay for your book too. I feel like that analogy made sense, but I was never good at making analogies are really extended. That would be more of an extended metaphor, really. So if that made sense, please let me know. But that is it for this advice video. It's not really like a direct how-to guide, but I think tips on like how to start draft 1. And since I gave you all these wonderful tips that have helped me start draft 1, and I am currently on draft 3, almost done with draft. I'm like more than halfway through a draft 3. We'll be querying soon. I think that maybe that makes me just slightly more credible than you looking up advice from people online and then thinking, yeah, I'll figure out the water system before I can go write. But if you guys have any more suggestions for writing videos, I know my friend Ethel had suggested a video idea, and I don't know if I'm gonna do that one. I think since I'm going over there to Europe where she is and she wants to be in a video, we can just chat about that. Like I said, any ideas for any more writing videos that you want, any suggestions for like tips and advice, like how to deal with a difficult character, how to write fairly realistic characters. I know that you guys are hearing it just from my word alone, but I have from people who have read my works, and that is many a professor and many a student and many a good friend and stranger. I do get told that my characters are pretty like realistic and fleshed out. So if you guys want any if you guys have any suggestions for anything, just let me know. I'm more than happy to give you guys advice. But until next time, hit like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz, and I'll talk to you guys in my next video. I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope February is kicking off right, because it's the second month of the year and this should be going up Sunday when it's February. So until next time, bye!